Before a pre-draft weigh-in for the Philadelphia 76ers, Charles Barkley once famously went on a binge eating session that made him gain over 20 pounds. In the course of 48 hours, Barkley by himself ate 2 Denny Grand Slam meals, half the Red Lobster menu, an entire KFC lunch menu, a big steak dinner, multiple McDonald's Filet-O-Fish sandwiches, and the entire time was washing it down with ridiculous amounts of beer. When he finally weighed in for the Sixers, he weighed a whopping 300 pounds. However, Barkley, who even in college was known for his weight and overeating, was able to curb his habits and go on to have a Hall of Fame career. However, while Barkley was able to have a successful career, this wasn't the case for all NBA players, some who were even potential superstars. Robert Tractor Taylor, who was once traded for Dirk Nowitzki, would regularly eat 2 15-inch double-portion cheesesteaks with large fries, which equaled to around 4,000 plus calories. Mel Turpin, who at one point was traded to the Jazz, was originally listed at 264 pounds, but when weighing in after his trade, he weighed in at 282 pounds. When asked how he could gain 17 pounds in one night, Mel stated that, quote, "I like airplane food." And one player had a weight issue so bad that to this day, they are the only player to be suspended for an entire season because of their weight. In a sport that requires so much cardio and explosive movement like basketball, excessive weight gain is not an option for players trying to play long-term at an NBA level. And for superstars that deal with weight issues, they don't usually stay superstars for long, which was exactly the case for Sonics legend Shawn Kemp. During Shawn Kemp's prime, if you had told someone that he would become an overweight bench warmer, they would have thought you were psychotic. And that's because Shawn Kemp in his prime was an absolute superstar. From his highlight reel dunks and incredible athleticism, Kemp earned the name Rain Man because of his athletic dominance. In '96, alongside Gary Payton, Kemp led the Supersonics to the NBA Finals and to this day is considered a Seattle sports legend. However, because of Kemp's weight, his career came crashing down. In 1997, Kemp was traded to the Cavaliers, where he initially was still a good player, but the following year, when the NBA went through a lockout-shortened season, he showed up to training camp massively overweight. In Seattle, Shawn Kemp often played at around 255 pounds, but when he showed up to training camp, he weighed in at a whopping 315 pounds. When his coach asked him what happened, Kemp said, quote, "Coach, I didn't think we were coming back." However, even with this weight gain, Kemp initially was able to play at a decent level, but by the age of 31, his weight issues and incidents of substance abuse saw his play fall off a cliff. Kemp went from someone who basically averaged 18 points and 10 rebounds his entire career to barely averaging 6 points a game. Steve Kerr, who had once played against Kemp in his prime and later played with Kemp during his decline, was surprised at the stark difference in Kemp's play. Kemp went from battling Dennis Rodman and being one of the most electric players in the finals to struggling in the paint and barely putting up half the field goal attempts he used to average. Because of Kemp's intense decline, he was out of the league by the age of 33 and became one of the biggest what-if cases in NBA history. But while Shawn Kemp's weight issue was a major factor in his career decline, he only dealt with weight issues toward the later end of his career. However, there were other players that are infamous for their eating habits even in college. One of these players was the University of Kentucky's Melvin Turpin, who was not only known for his massive basketball talent, but also for his massive appetite. His eating habits were so bad that at one point, Mel's coach assigned dedicated team managers dubbed the Pizza Police to make sure Mel wasn't doing any extra snacking. And this somewhat worked as Mel was able to stay at a manageable weight, but even the Pizza Police couldn't completely stop him from getting the food he wanted. According to one of Mel's teammates, Kenny Walker, Mel late at night would order pizzas to his dorm, but because he knew the Pizza Police would be watching the dorm's entrance, he would use a rope to pull the pizza up through his dorm room window. Stories like these made Mel's appetite the stuff of legends, and people started to nickname him things like Dinner Bell Mel. However, this nickname was all in good fun as Mel still played well during his time in Kentucky, to the point where Mel was seen as a future star and selected 6th in the NBA draft. However, once Mel jumped to the pros, his weight issues became not so funny anymore as he wasn't able to manage his weight like in college and was constantly overweight and dealt with conditioning issues. These issues were to the point that throughout Mel's short NBA career, he accrued over $180,000 in fines. In one infamous incident, when he was traded to the Utah Jazz, Mel assured Utah reporters that he weighed at his listed weight of 265 pounds. However, when Mel officially weighed in the very next day, he came in at 282 pounds. When reporters asked Mel how he could gain 17 pounds in one day, Mel said that, quote, "I like airplane food." Because of situations like this, Mel flamed out of the league after 6 seasons and would never pan out as a star he was projected to become, which is similar to the situation for former face of the Vancouver Grizzlies franchise, Bryant "Big Country" Reeves.
And he had the ugliest Duckworth one-hand jumper. He shoot it and it always go in. And till halftime, I'm looking at the stats. Shaq 15, Big Country 26. I'm like, man.
Unlike Mel, Big Country was not only drafted for his star potential, but at one point was seen as the face of the Grizzlies franchise. In Big Country's first 2 years in the league, he actually played so well that the Grizzlies gave him a massive 6-year, $61.8 million contract to solidify him as their franchise cornerstone. However, this contract quickly became a horrible one, and that's because just 2 years into the contract, Big Country showed up to training camp weighing 315 pounds, which was around 40 pounds over his playing weight. This was due to the fact that in the offseason, when Big Country would go back to his small town in Oklahoma, he would eat a diet consisting of red meat, potatoes, cheeseburgers, and copious amounts of chewing tobacco. Alongside all this, Big Country would barely train in the offseason, citing his lack of competition and gym accessibility as his reason why. In response to his massive weight gain, Big Country was benched for the start of the season. However, this punishment didn't stop him as he would consistently deal with weight issues for the rest of his career. By the age of 28, Big Country was a shell of his former self, and because of his conditioning being non-existent alongside chronic back issues, he full-on retired from the league, which is similar to another player named John Hotplate Williams, but John's weight issues actually set a record in the league. In the 1991 to 1992 NBA season, John Williams made history, but not for a good reason, because John Williams became the first and only player to be suspended an entire season solely because he was overweight. Before the suspension, John had always suffered weight issues to the point that when he entered the league, he was given the nickname Hot Plate because of his weight troubles. However, initially, his weight issues weren't enough to overshadow his talents. Standing 6'8", Williams was a do-it-all forward who was ahead of his time. Scouts praised both his overall skills and basketball IQ to the point where even Hall of Fame coach Larry Brown stated that Williams had the potential talent to be on the Olympic Dream Team. Every year that Williams played, his averages continued to rise and he looked like he was on a skyward trajectory. However, Williams' potential came crashing down in his 3rd year. In the beginning of the 1989 season, Williams was on pace for a breakout season, averaging around 18 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists. But unfortunately, during a December game against the Jazz, he suffered a devastating injury, tearing both his MCL and ACL. Because of this, he was stuck in a full leg cast for months and was unable to do anything but sit around and eat. On top of this, in the span of months, his grandmother and 2 childhood friends of his passed away, and because of this, Williams went into a depression which made him turn to excessive eating and alcohol to cope. With all this, he would eat so much that by the summer of 1990, he weighed an immense 300 pounds, which was almost 40 pounds over his playing weight of 260. In response to this massive weight gain, the Wizards put him on supervised diet programs and even offered him cash incentives to lose weight. At one point, Wizards owner Abe Pollin reportedly offered Williams $200,000 to lose weight. However, even this didn't work and he continued to struggle both with his weight and play. Because of this, before the 1991 season, the Wizards in an unprecedented move suspended Williams without pay for the entire season. This led to a very nasty battle where Williams and the Wizards organization had a very public feud over the validity of the Wizards suspension. This led to sports media having a field day where Williams' situation was reported on by many of the biggest sports news agencies, and he quickly became the punchline of every joke. As this continued to go on, eventually the Wizards grew tired of the situation and ended up trading Williams to the Clippers. And Williams actually saw this trade as a turning point and managed to drop weight. During his Clippers tenure, Williams went from an insane 330 pounds to around 270, which was the lightest he had been since his early years in the league. However, unfortunately for Williams, even with his weight loss, his years of obesity had taken its toll, and he was never able to play at a high level again, never averaging about 7 points in his Clippers tenure. By the age of 28, John Williams had gone from Dream Team potential to out of the league. However, even with how high Williams' potential had been, it wasn't at the level of someone who was projected to be the face of the league. Because Zion Williamson, at one point in his basketball career, was one of the most hyped up NBA prospects since LeBron James.
Is Zion the best prospect since the king, LeBron James?
I think so.
Even from high school, Zion was a viral sensation because of his insane athleticism and rim-shattering dunks. His high school mixtapes would consistently have millions of views, and before he even entered college, he had over 1 million followers on Instagram. As Zion entered college, his popularity and hype became even stronger, and any game he played in had extremely high viewership, with ESPN reporting that games that featured Zion had 30% higher viewership than other college basketball games. And Zion's popularity was so big that his actions actually monetarily affected companies around him. In a nationally televised game, Zion had a freak accident that involved him literally bursting through his Nike shoes. This incident became so insanely viral that the next morning, Nike stock actually dropped close to 2% in value, which at the time was around a $1.1 billion drop in market cap. Zion's hype was very real, and as he entered the league, many people believed he could become the next face of the NBA. However, Zion's weight issues said otherwise. Even during Zion's time in Duke, he had been overweight, weighing around 275 pounds, but when people brought up these issues, there wasn't much they could say because he was still dominant in college. However, during Zion's tenure in the NBA, the narrative shifted as Zion started to suffer injuries and his weight started to balloon. During Zion's rehab, it was actually reported that at one point he had weighed in at 300 pounds, and unfortunately for Zion, people were able to see him at his heaviest because he still had to be in public commercials to fulfill his sponsorship obligations. Because of all this, fans and media blamed Zion's heavy weight for his constant injuries, and in many fans' eyes, he quickly went from potential face of the NBA to biggest potential waste of the NBA. However, when Zion was able to be on the court, he still played at a near all-star level, which led to him signing a massive 5-year $195 million extension with his team, but the contract had big weight stipulations. Zion would have to stay below a combined weight and body fat percentage of 295 pounds, or he would risk 20% of his salary. And this clause seemed to work as Zion was able to maintain his weight better, and even while dealing with injuries at one point, entered training camp at 264 pounds, which was the lightest he had been since college. Zion was able to recover from his weight issues and seemed to be headed in a better trajectory. However, while it is possible that Zion could play at a league MVP level and become the face of the league, most likely he'll never be able to regain the same hype he had when entering the league.
Cool. So that's it? Hello? Oop. Oh my gosh.